Have you ever heard a theory so wild it makes you question everything you learned in history class? Well, today we're diving into a book that does just that. It's called Was Charlemagne Really? By Mario Ardent, and it puts forward an idea about the Middle Ages that is, well, it's out there. So let's get into it.
The author kicks things off with this quote from Marshall McLuhan. And you know, it's the perfect way to frame what's coming. The argument in this book is huge. So big, in fact, that its best defense might just be our own inability to believe it. It's basically saying, hey, get ready to suspend your disbelief.
And here it is, the central question of the entire book. What if Charlemagne, the guy we call the father of Europe, what if he wasn't real? Not in the 8th century anyway. What if he was more of a historical ghost, a character invented and placed into the past? I know, it's a crazy thought, so let's see how the author even begins to make this argument.
Okay, so the core idea here is what the author calls a doubled history. He's not saying these people are complete fiction. Instead, he's arguing that the figures we know, like Charlemagne, are actually phantom reflections. Think of them as historical echoes of real people who lived much, much later, just copied and pasted into an earlier fabricated timeline.
So, let's be super clear on the main claim. The book says that the Charlemagne who supposedly died in 814 is a historical construct. He's a character created to fill a gap in history that, according to the author, was also invented. So if Charlemagne is a copy, then who's the original?
Well, according to the book, this is your guy, Karl, or Charles, the first of Valois. Now this was a real person, a seriously powerful French prince in the late 13th and early 14th centuries. He was a warrior, he was a regent of France, he even held the title of Emperor of Constantinople. The book argues his life was basically the source material for the whole Charlemagne legend. And, you know, it doesn't just stop with Charlemagne. The author takes this same idea and applies it to his grandfather, the legendary Charles Martel, you know, the hero of the Battle of Tours. The book claims he too is just another one of these phantom reflections.
And the proposed original for Charles Martel? Another absolute heavyweight of the 13th century, Karl I of Anjou. He was the king of Sicily, brother to the king of France, probably one of the most powerful men in Europe at the time. The whole argument is that these two Karls from the 13th and 14th centuries were so important that their histories were essentially cloned and thrown backwards in time to create the founding myths of the Carolingian dynasty.
Okay, so this is where the author tries to ground the theory with some specific dates. He points to what he sees as these uncanny parallels. So you have Charlemagne's famous coronation on Christmas Day 800. The book claims that's a mirror of Karl of Anjou's coronation in Rome on Orthodox Christmas 1266. And then look at the years they died, 814 for Charlemagne, 1285 for Karl of Anjou. And that brings us to this number, 471. The gap between those two death dates is exactly 471 years. Now the author argues this is no coincidence. He says this is the key. This is the evidence of a deliberate man-made shift in the timeline. 471 years becomes the magic number for this whole theory. So if this part of history was just invented, you have to ask who would do that and how? Well, the book proposes a pretty wild answer. It claims the forgers used a blueprint that everyone would have known, the Bible, specifically the stories of the first kings of ancient Israel. The book actually lays it out almost like a formula. You've got the first 3 kings of Israel, Saul, David, and Solomon. And the author argues that the first 3 Carolingian kings follow that exact same pattern. You have Pepin, like Saul, the first king to be anointed by a religious authority. Then you get Karl, Charlemagne, who is like King David, the great warrior who builds the empire. And then comes Ludwig the Pious, who, like Solomon, consolidates everything and is associated with building a great temple, or in this case, the Great Chapel at Aachen. Now, to really hammer this David connection home, the book makes a linguistic argument. It says that the name Charlemagne, or Carolus in Latin, was chosen on purpose. The author suggests it comes from the Latin word carus, which means beloved or dear. And what does the Hebrew name David mean? Beloved. So according to this theory, Karl was quite literally named to be the new David.
And the blueprint idea even extends to architecture. The book claims that the famous chapel at Aachen wasn't just a church. No, it was deliberately built to be that new Temple of Solomon. And the supposed smoking gun? Historical sources claim it took 7 years to build, which is the exact same amount of time the Bible says it took Solomon to build the original temple in Jerusalem.
So we've had the double and the blueprint. Now the author presents another kind of evidence, these weird, unnatural-looking patterns in the historical record. The thinking is that real history is chaotic and messy, right? But a fake history? Well, a fake history might have neat little symmetries and suspicious gaps that give the game away.
Now take a look at this. The book points out these pairs of French kings, a Philip and a Louis, who ruled for the exact same number of years, down to the day. Philip I and Louis VII both ruled for 49 years. Philip II and Louis IX, both 44. The book asks, what are the odds of that happening randomly? To the author, this isn't chance. It's the fingerprint of a designer.
And then there's this really odd thing the author calls the time without Karls. So after the Carolingians, the name Karl, or Charles, one of the most famous royal names ever, just disappears. For nearly 300 years, you just don't see it among the top royals in France or Germany. Then, bam, it comes back in the 13th century with Karl of Anjou. The book poses the question, why would the name of your most legendary emperor just vanish for 3 centuries?
The author also goes after the physical evidence, or the lack of it. For being the capital of this massive empire, Aachen has some problems. For one, no coins actually minted by Charlemagne have ever been found there. One single coin from his era turned up in 2008, but it was in dirt that had been dug up and moved around a century ago. The city's founding charter from Charlemagne, it only exists tucked inside a completely different document from 400 years later. And to top it off, some architectural studies apparently date the famous chapel itself to centuries after Charlemagne was supposed to have built it.
So, when you put all of this together, what do you get? Well, the book isn't just questioning one historical figure. It's really putting a giant question mark over several entire centuries of European history as we know it. So let's just boil this all down one more time. The author's case rests on 3 big ideas. 1, the double. This idea that Carolingians are just phantoms of later rulers pushed back 471 years. 2, the blueprint, the claim that their stories were copied from the Bible. And 3, the patterns, all these weird numerical symmetries and physical evidence gaps that are supposed to prove it was all a fabrication.
Look, whether you think this theory is brilliant or just absolutely bonkers, it does make you think. The author's claims are way out on the fringe, for sure. But they act as this powerful reminder that history isn't just a bunch of facts. It's a story that gets told and retold. And that leaves you with a really unsettling final thought. If history can be built, if it can be constructed, then how much of any of it is the absolute truth?